Okay, we are recording now.
Give people another minute and then we can start going through the agenda.
I think it'd be okay to just start.
All right. So first up, Mimir release candidate for 2.2 is available. Peter, do you want to go over some of the highlights from that?
Yeah, I can do that, and welcome everyone. So the release candidate is out, and there are multiple nice features. One very interesting one that we are all happy about is experimental support for out-of-order ingestion. And what that means is that you can now configure per tenant time window for how long back you want to allow out-of-order samples. And of course, the further you go back, the more problems you will have, because like it will use more space, more memory, and so on. But it's still a nice feature if you don't go too far back. We are still just going to test this in production, so make sure not to use it on anything that's critical for you. Marco, do you want to take the next one? Ease of use improvements?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. We are working to make Mimir easier to configure, operate, and run. We are working on several things, and in the next release, there's just one single improvement, which is simplified error messages. The idea is that starting from this release, you will have, other than the descriptive error message, you will also have a unique error ID when you receive an error, for example, through the HTTP API response or through the logs. And then for each of these errors, there's a runbook in our documentation. So the runbook explains you what the error means, what are the common causes, and how to fix it. Again, this is just a starting point, not an ending point. We are working on other things like further simplifying the configuration. We are currently discussing an alternative deployment model to the monolithic and microservices deployments. And that's something we will cover in the next community calls and releases.
And after that, I think is the bucket index prefix that I think Dimitar was working on. It allows you to give each component a prefix to use within a single object storage bucket, so that you can use a single object storage bucket for all of Mimir, such as the ruler, the TSDB, and there's another one in there, I think. Alerts. And then we got wall replay speed up improvements.
So we have actually two bug fixes in the ingester rollouts. One is the wall replay, and Brian has fixed some bottleneck there, or actually just shortening the sleep. And that actually makes it quite faster by about 50%. So that's very nice. The other bug fix we did is when you're not unregistering your ingesters during rollout, and at the same time you use very long heartbeat period, now ingesters will update their state much faster in the ring. So these two improvements will surely help. We already see how they help in our rollouts. Brian, I was just saying how you fix the read-ahead log replay. If you have any comment on that. I mentioned that you have shortened the sleep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of an interesting problem to why there is a sleep there in the first place, but that's way bigger than the subject of this meeting.
And the bug fix is in Prometheus, so Prometheus also benefits from this.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, so I think that sleep gets called every record in the wall, and a record is, broadly speaking, the same size as a scrape. So in Prometheus, you would not call that so many times. In Mimir, we kind of divide. Well, we get a remote write, which is smaller than a scrape anyway, and then we divide it across all the ingesters, and so you have way more smaller records in the wall, and it impacts much more.
We
Sounds
see
like,
about
yeah.
50% improvement in our rollouts, so that's very nice.
All right. Creo, do you want to talk about the upcoming version of the Helm chart?
Yes, I do. Hi, my name is Creo, and we've been working on a new version of the Mimir distributed Helm chart, and it contains such changes to the Helm chart itself that cause some breaking changes, but also it has many new features. This does mean that the Helm chart will be versioned 3.0, and it will contain reference to the Mimir 2.2 release. But since the Helm specification says that we should use semantic versioning, we thought that was important to follow. So these versions will be slightly different, but it reflects the fact that Mimir 2.2 is much more compatible with 2.1 Mimir than the Helm chart version 3.0 with the Helm chart version 2.2. Just to clarify that. So on to the features that we added here. And the first is a one-liner that now we support installing on Openshift. But actually, I think this contains the most work we have done because we started out from a relatively small change, but then ran into issues with how we install and use memcached beside Mimir for caching, results, indexes, and so on. And also at the same time, this was a bit complicated, and also at the same time, Bitnami, which is the maintainer of the memcached chart, which we used, ran into some kind of problem, and they basically removed older versions of the memcached charts before the end of the year and moved them into another place. And that was like a bit of a shock to everybody. You can read up on the issue in the Bitnami repo. It's a fun read. But anyway, that pushed us to just make the decision, which has already been requested by the community, to just use the memcached directly and manage memcached stateful sets and Kubernetes resources directly. So the upshot is that the Openshift support contains two changes. One is actual support for Openshift, and the other is that we removed this subchart that contained memcached, and we are now directly managing memcached, which gives us much more consistent view of our resources inside Mimir, and also it's more consistent with, for example, Loki, the logs solution from Grafana, because that is directly managing memcached as well. And this is part of this work has introduced two kind of breaking changes. One is some differences to how we configure memcached in the Helm chart, and also a bit change to how we set up the role-based authentication and the service account. So look out for the changelog, and also we will have a document detailing how you can upgrade. So that's one thing. And the next is let me run a second. Oh yeah, so we are introducing meta monitoring into the Helm chart. This is something that you could already do by hand, but this makes it much easier and also integrated with Grafana Cloud. So now, for example, you can fairly quickly set up meta monitoring for your Mimir instance and start a free tier, a free account on grafana.cloud and quickly get monitoring metrics about your Mimir into Grafana.cloud. So basically, you would be able to have dashboards in Grafana Cloud that shows the health and performance of your Mimir. Or alternatively, you can also use meta monitoring to scrape metrics into local Prometheus and look at meta monitoring data there and so on, or combine both. I, for example, tested it while having Prometheus operator and also the cloud integration, and I could see the my health metrics and dashboards in both places, which is super nice. This is primarily aimed at our enterprise customers so that we can provide better support for them, but it's since the chart is the same for enterprise customers and OSS users, you can use this feature as well. Right, and then oh yeah, regarding the configuration, how we handle configuration. If you have been using the Mimir chart so far, how we handle the application configuration, meaning the configuration for Mimir itself, it was a little bit cumbersome that you had to, if you wanted to make changes, then you had to copy the whole thing and make changes in it. It had its pros and cons. Having the configuration that way meant that you had like very clearly what was going to happen, and also you could use Helm templates in the configuration to make it variable and like customizable between clusters and stuff like that. On the other hand, for more simpler use cases, it's kind of an overkill. So we made some changes to support structured config, which is what Loki has as well in their Helm chart, which means that you don't need to copy the configuration anymore. You can change parts of it by overwrite or adding values via the structured config. And for example, you can use this for setting up the storage buckets, the object store in a more simple way. We'll have documentation on how to do this as well. Possibly a bit later than the release date, but that's it depends on scheduling a little bit. And also what we added as a new feature here is that now you can store the configuration in a config map instead of secret. That was all again requested by community, and it makes sense as well that if you store it in a config map, that means that Helm template command will show it as clear text, and then Helm diff can actually show a difference between two configurations. So for example, at an upgrade or when you make a change, it's much easier to see what's going to be actually changed, because the secret is pretty much unreadable without some processing. But since this is a config map and not a secret, we also added support for injecting secrets and credentials from the environment, so that you don't need to write your passwords into the configuration anymore. You can inject them from the environment. And we have some additional features around environment handling as well, that now you don't have to set it for every Mimir pod. You can have global environment settings as well, which is quite useful for this purpose. Same goes for global pod annotations that can be set for all or Mimir pods to keep track of, for example, secret versions and stuff like that. And then, Yeah, the Helm chart actually didn't have explicit support for one of the caches that the system can use, which is the results cache used by the query frontend. So now that is a feature of the Helm chart as well. You can turn it on and use caching on the query results. And there are some, let's say, more minor changes. I would just talk about two things, or actually, I'm going to ask Patrick to talk about one of them, the testing one. But first, I want to mention that a lot of people ask, like, what are the first things to do and how to get started with the Helm chart. So the getting started guide for the Helm chart is now in review. It's going to be merged soon, and it will be part of this release. And it will give you a step-by-step guide on how to get from, not having Mimir running in your Kubernetes cluster to having it in a cluster and having some metrics in it already. And then the last but not least, we added some testing support for the Helm chart, and I will ask Patrick to say a few words about that.
Yeah, so in addition to all this actual, like user-facing stuff for the Helm chart, a lot of our work for this release has been on improving the experience of contributing to the Helm chart. So this is a part of that. It also happens to be a user-facing thing, and so that's why it's going to end up in the release notes. But basically, we've added loads of testing along the entire lifecycle for the Helm chart. So we now, for every PR, can tell what exactly has changed because we commit a golden record of the actual rendered Helm chart to the repo. And so the git diff is really easy to read and see like kind of what's actually changing, even if the templates are kind of complicated. We are installing and testing the Helm chart in several different configurations, both open source and enterprise, on every PR, every commit. And so as support of that, and in support of that, we added a smoke test based on the existing Mimir continuous test project, where basically after you install the chart with Helm, you can run Helm test, and it will spin up a Kubernetes job that just runs the Mimir continuous test binary once. And so it'll do a read and write to the cluster and validate that everything looks okay. And so that same thing is available both for you to use after installing or upgrading Mimir, and it's also used in CI when we are testing all of our changes. So over time, as Mimir continuous test changes, like we've talked, for example, about extending it to test other parts of the Mimir API besides reading and writing, those things will become a part of the Helm chart testing process and that smoke test after install kind of automatically. And so all of the stuff that Creo just mentioned about the migration and everything, I'm working on a migration guide right now to walk you through how to go from 2.1 to 3.0. And it's not going to be fully exhaustive yet. As Creo mentioned, there's a lot to cover, and so probably some of the documentation will come a little bit after, but at the release of 3.0, we will at least have a document describing how to do the migration with some examples of like, if your config looks like this in the first place, here's what it should look like after, and hopefully that can help walk you through it. And if you run into anything, obviously the community Slack or this meeting or GitHub discussions, feel free to ask, and we'll be in there and help you.
Yeah, thank you. And the last thing I want to say is looking into the future a little bit. We have, mentioned documentation a number of times, and actually we have a number of, a long list of features lined up for the Helm chart, but we also recognize that documentation is very important. So we will make an effort to balance the number of features that we introduce next time with the number of documents we will write. So look forward to more documentation around Helm. Thank you.
Nice. Thank you very much. That's all we have on the agenda. If anyone from the community has any feedback about anything we covered or just in general or questions, feel free to speak up now.
I see the written comments, but also we don't bite, and also feel free to put stuff onto the agenda for next time if there's anything which you want to talk about on the community side, or something which you would like to see discussed, or propose something, or maybe even work with one of us to create something. Blah. Be bold. We don't bite.
I would be interested to hear how people are using Mimir. Is it in production? Are you testing it? Is it your home lab? Is it, I don't know, big company where you are deploying it? Can you share some details with us?
Hello. Yeah, sure.
That's fair.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'm working with Diego. I think you've been talking a bit in the Slack. We are a real small company. We build a product similar to Heroku, and we're just starting out. So we don't have a big production yet, but we are trying to use Mimir to store metrics coming from applications from our clients. So let's say you create an account on our platform and you deploy an application. We want to collect metrics from there and bring them in a nice way to the clients on our platform. So yeah, we're just deploying. We are not really production ready. But yeah, that's our use case.
That's
Are you
exciting.
running into any problems or something you would like to see improved?
Yeah, actually we're running into like one tiny problem with deploying the Helm chart. So we would want to set up the ruler and the alert manager in a way where we don't have to copy the configuration from Mimir directly. So the repo, the alerts.yaml, the rules.yaml that is generated by the mixin config. And so we've raised an issue about this, I think, 2 weeks ago, which is about like deploying some sort of working on some sort of a Mimir operator to automatically sync, Prometheus operator CRDs. I can link it in the meeting if you want to. And so, yeah, I think like the main focus for us has been more integration with the Prometheus Kubernetes native stack, which has been worked on quite a lot in 2.2, I think, like with the meta monitoring in the Helm chart. So that's a big plus for us. And I hope we'll see more of that. And thanks for the work again.
Yeah, I guess we can
Thanks for sharing.
comment on that part specifically. So yeah, we saw your issue. Thank you very much for opening that. And we've been talking not super actively yet because we're focused on this 3.0 release for the Helm chart, but we have talked a little bit about what would we want to do, whether it's an operator or if there's some way we can reuse the Prometheus operator or something like that. So I guess like it sounds like there's two separate things here that you brought up. One is having Mimir's own alerts that are in the repo available easily in the Helm chart. And then there's a separate potentially thing, which is being able to configure arbitrary rules for arbitrary metrics and tenants via the Prometheus rule CRDs. And I just want to clarify that you mean both of those things, right?
Yeah, I think like the first point is like Mimir shipping its own Prometheus rule CRD with like its own alerts and rules, and then providing the ability to configure the ruler automatically when running in Kubernetes, where like you can, because we have a cluster with like a lot of different technology stacks deployed, and so we have tons and tons of of alerts and tons of rules to configure. If we were to type these by hand and copy them and upload them through Mimir tool, we would kind of like get lost and not be able to follow updates with the Helm charts. And so what we've been doing before was using Prometheus operator, because we had a Prometheus setup. And so we would just rely on it to automatically discover the CRDs and configure the alert manager, the ruler, I mean, the Prometheus server itself. And so with Mimir, we're running into the issue where we have to upload them through Mimir tool manually. But we're working on it, and we'll be happy to share like our solution to this if we come up with one.
Yeah, we'd love for you to share. I think the first thing about getting Mimir's own alerts into the Helm chart, I think that's probably a relatively straightforward thing that I'm sure we'll do in the next couple of releases. The CRD part will need to, yeah, it's just like because of its nature, a little bit more complicated, but definitely I think something we've talked about. So whatever you end up coming up with, we'd love to see.
Very cool. We'll look into it and we'll tell you guys how we tackle the problem.
I'm curious, do you have any use for the out-of-order ingestion feature?
Yes.
We've had some issues where when we have like when we're deploying a an update to Mimir and Mimir comes down, because we're like in staging at the moment, so we don't specifically focus on having a clean rollout mechanism where there's no downtime. The agents on our cluster are like retrying requests a lot, and so sometimes they're going to be retrying requests which are very old, and so this is where Mimir is gonna like replay what it's lost, like the data points it like didn't see because it was rebooting, and so this is where we're having a lot of out of order sample errors. So we have a use case for that, which is when Mimir goes down, I guess.
I would like to jump in because I think this is an interesting discussion. Hi, Rich. So when Prometheus or the Grafana agent, let's say, crash and then restart, at restart, they replay the write-ahead log and they remote write from what has been replayed from the write-ahead log. It's very likely, unless the outage lasted more than an hour, it's very likely that the out-of-order errors you get are for samples that were already ingested before the outage, because Prometheus or the agent just replay everything. Yeah, and then but in practice, no one of your samples have been skipped. As far as the outage doesn't last more than an hour, because the other problem we have in Mimir, which is also solved by the, let's say, out of order feature, is that right now we can't ingest any sample which is older than 1 hour compared to the most recent sample received for that specific tenant. With the out of order feature, we can ingest any sample with any timestamp in any order, basically.
Okay. Maybe that's what we've been seeing. Thanks for the clarification.
I have another question, which is unrelated, and well, we're not experts, but we like your guys' stack. So if you have any advice on our setup, I will briefly explain to you and our problem. So basically, we have that Mimir cluster, and we have a few nodes, and those nodes are collecting metrics and all pushing them to Mimir. And so this works fine. What we would like to consider is to have a lot of tenants actually. So what we would like to have is like, I don't know, thousands or 10,000 of tenants. But we don't think it's a problem on Mimir's side. We think it will be an issue on the nodes that are pushing the data side, because we run one agent per node. And if we understood correctly, one batch equals one tenant. So that means if we have, like, let's say 1,000 tenants on one node, we have to push 1,000 times to Mimir. So we imagine it will be problematic. So first thing, is it correct? Okay, and then we didn't try, so we don't know if it's really a problem, but we imagine it will be a problem. Do you have any ideas on how to do better, or maybe do something else? I don't know.
What is the reason for having so many tenants? Is it some kind of security, like you don't want the readers to see things?
Yes, but basically each tenant gets his own metric, and in the end we map it up to real clients. So basically we'd like for each client to be able to, like, we'd like one client of our company to be one Mimir tenant. I don't know if that's clear.
That makes sense.
So you want to expose the metrics to your customers, and then
Yes.
each customer is a tenant in Mimir.
Yes.
Are you going to run, what I didn't understand is, are you going to run one agent per customer?
No.
Okay.
We have like nodes, let's say around a dozen of nodes for now, and on each node there are many
Applications.
many customers.
And yeah, I'm not an agent expert, but how can you inject the HTTP header with the tenant ID for different tenants from the same agent?
Yeah, that's actually like a really very real problem we have. So we have to distinguish between like each metric belongs to which tenant, and this is also a problem we're having agent side, which is how do we take like, I don't know, 1,000 metrics and cut them into like small chunks of, oh, okay, I know this one belongs to each to this tenant or this tenant. And so I think we would fix this either through a proxy or through another solution by actually like modifying the code of the exporter, which exports the metrics we're trying to scrape. So this is a bit like technical thing that we haven't really decided upon, but if it were to be fixed, we still don't know if we would be able to push those metrics to Mimir without causing some overhead because of how many requests we would be doing.
Yeah, the overhead is real if every single request just push a very small number of samples. You will have an overhead both in the distributor but also in the ingesters, because from the distributor to ingesters, the number of samples that we are going to push in every single request will be very small, like, I don't know, 1 or 2 samples per request between each distributor and the ingester. Because right now the distributors don't do any sort of buffering. I think just today, Brian, or yesterday, Brian was mentioning this. Like, Brian, am I wrong, or you recently mentioned an idea about buffering the received samples, I guess, in the distributor, so that we reduce the number of requests to the ingesters?
That was for multiple requests for the same tenant. So I don't think it would be relevant to if you're talking about where the problem is you've got tens of thousands of tenants. Yeah, it's certainly an issue. Yeah, I mean, because we do basically a disk IO every time we handle a request in the ingester to the write-ahead log, and currently try to sync that to the disk. So you could conceivably relax that requirement and just sort of go, kind of come back a bit on relying more on the fact that you've got 3 copies of the data and less on the fact that it must be on the disk. I don't know. Or you could kind of slow things up at the agent if you, because bigger sends are better from that point of view, no matter what you're doing. Well, up to a point. So the default in Prometheus is 500 symbols per send, and I personally think that's a bit on the low side, like 1,000 or 2,000. I think would be more appropriate. I probably wouldn't just, I wouldn't do 100,000. I probably wouldn't do 20,000.
I'm trying to think through how you could inject some label automatically to all the metrics you scrape and then turn that into a tenant ID. I think that sounds like it would need,
Yeah.
you'd need to write a proxy to do that.
Yeah,
That's
sorry.
Probably not trivial. Sorry.
Yeah, it's an issue we're like trying to solve at the moment, and we're going to like think about it a lot, and we can actually like come back to you guys and tell you what solution we've like decided upon. And I think we're going to default to injecting a label, which is still some heavy work on like a proxy or some other mechanism to inject this label, especially because we have to do like a DB lookup, which we can afford, so we have to like stream configuration or something else. So we're gonna maybe like try something like just ejecting a label. But maybe I'm thinking like maybe Mimir could provide a way to like say, okay, so this label represents your org ID, and receive the request as like, I don't know, a single tenant or like the anonymous tenant, and say, okay, I'm now going to look at every metric and say, okay, this one belongs to each tenant because it has this specific label.
So we sort of have a feature like that in the enterprise version, label-based access control, where you can sort of limit a tenant to a subset of metrics based on some particular label. So you could have like your customer ID label, and then you could hand out access based on that. But I don't think there's anything in Mimir that is comparable to that.
Okay.
So maybe I'm misunderstanding the use case.
Okay.
What Nick is talking about, this is the read path, right? So you can basically ask Mimir to only return subset of queries based on some specific label that's always injected, so to say, to the query. You are, Diego, talking about the write path, and Marco's answer in the chat is basically a proxy which can do this. It can take a look at the label of incoming series and then distribute them to different tenants. But if they are in different tenants, then you can't use the solution mentioned by Nick, because that assumes that everything is in single tenant, and you basically get subset based on some label, which would be some kind of tenant label.
Okay.
So it's 2 different approaches.
Yeah,
that you can
approaches.
choose.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. We're gonna like look into that after the meeting, I guess.
I got a run. So thanks a lot for your answers. And see you soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks again.
Thanks for joining us.
If that's all we got on the agenda, then see you later, everyone. Thanks.
See you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Right.